That's really a hard act to follow. So I put together this text and sources. Rabbi Fixler and I had, worked this out in advance to make sure we don't duplicate what we were going to say. And when I learned what he was going to talk about, which some of it I was thinking about talking about, but I thought I'd put together these texts, which I'm going to look at with you because he didn't have time to. But before I do that, I want to go back to some basic principles, and that is, first of all, that the Ten Commandments really are important to Jews. That's why we're going to read it tomorrow. There is a tradition of standing up when we hear the Ten Commandments. We don't stand for too many other portions of the Bible or the Torah when we're reading them. The Ten Commandments were put in the golden box with the two angels on top that were found in Raiders of the Lost Ark and are now housed in Washington. That box was lost until Indiana Jones found it. So it was in the first temple. It was in the Holy of Holies of the first temple. The holiest place in the whole world for Judaism housed the Ten Commandments. So that's not a small matter. Of course, they were lost when the temple was destroyed by the Babylonians, and when we rebuilt the second temple, we left the room empty, which must have been a little weird to the Greeks, because in any other, to Greeks and Romans, if you go to a temple in any of those places, of course, the god or goddess is in the center of the temple. You got to know who you're worshiping, and we were worshiping an empty room, which may have been one of the reasons that Antiochus thought we should put an idol up in there. The Jews are empty, worshiping space. It's weird. But anyway, we didn't have a replacement, so we left it empty. However, when synagogues replaced the temple, virtually every synagogue in the world has some depiction of the Ten Commandments because the Ten Commandments were housed in the temple. And it may not be easy to read, but they're up in they're in the purple letters over the ark over there. Hebrew going right to left. The right two columns are the first five. It's just the first two words of each commandment, and the second five are over there. But go to any synagogue, you usually see them. Often they're like those rounded tablets. I'm not sure where that shape came from, and two lions of Judah standing beside them. But in any case, they're in almost every synagogue and in different places in Jewish circles. Philo, as Rabbi Fixler mentioned, saw them as archetypes for all 613 commandments. It was in the temple worship during Second Temple time. We know this because the Mishnah records that the priests would get up and they would recite first Ahavat Olam or Ahava Rabbah or some version of that about God's love for us. Then they would recite the Ten Commandments. Then they recited the first paragraph, second paragraph, and third paragraph of the Shema. Then they said true and firm, emet v'yatziv, or emet, v'emunah, some version of that prayer, which ends in mi chamocha and Ga'al Yisrael, that God redeems Israel. And then they did ritzei, if you follow the Amidah, and then they did the priestly blessing. So it was part of the temple ritual. So what happened? What happened was the sectarians. Some sectarians wanted to claim, we don't know who they were, could have been early Christians, could have been the Samaritans, the Karaites, who knows. Somebody was claiming the Ten Commandments were the only commandments given to Moses, and the rest of it's Narishkeit. So the rabbi said, okay, we're not going to do the Ten Commandments anymore. We don't want to make people think that's all there was to it, and they took it out of the service when the synagogue took the place of the temple. Now, you'll often see people say that there is no Ten Commandments in the Siddur. That's not entirely true. I believe there's one Orthodox Siddur that now has put it back in. I did an AI search because Dr. Musher, who's here in the front row, had told me that his grandfather, Mordecai Kaplan, had put the Ten Commandments back in his Siddur. So I did a Google search with AI, and I said, did Mordecai Kaplan have it in the Siddur? And it said no. But that's wrong. And the reason Google didn't know that is because he pasted it into the back cover of the prayer book. So you can't trust Google AI. Just saying. And he said it every week after the Torah service, right? So it was done by some people. So having said it, it's all very important, and that nevertheless we kind of downplayed it somewhat over there. I should also mention that it was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls among some texts that looked like they were early prayer book texts in the Dead Sea Scrolls included the Ten Commandments, and also some pairs of tefillin in the Dead Sea area were found that had the Ten Commandments in one of the boxes in the tefillin. So there you are. Having said all that, I want to just kind of briefly review the items here that I showed you here. So first one is a comparison of the Exodus and Deuteronomy texts, and in boldface type are the differences. If it's boldface on the left, the Exodus text, it's not found in Deuteronomy. If it's boldface on the right, the Deuteronomy text, it's not in the Exodus text. And of course, one of the main differences is on Shabbat, Zachor v'Shamor, remember and observe. The Catholics, Rabbi Fixler mentioned, count, don't covet the neighbor's wife as one, and don't covet anything else that belongs to your neighbor as the second one. Interestingly enough, in the Deuteronomy text, as all of you know, in the Torah text, there's no punctuation marks, there's no vowels, there's no punctuation, there's no trope notes. You have to know how to pronounce the text. The one thing there is in the Torah text is paragraph breaks. And guess what? In the Deuteronomy version, there's a paragraph break after don't covet your neighbor's wife before don't covet anything else by your neighbor. So the Catholics may be onto something. I don't know. But anyway, there are differences in how we count them. The other Ten Commandments that Rabbi Fixler talked about is in chapter 34. And so chapter 34 is after the golden calf. Moses smashes the first set of tablets, and then he goes back up he carves out 2 new sets of tablets, and he goes up the mountain, and God's going to inscribe the new commandments on him. We do the 13 attributes of God's mercy, and then he inscribes them on the tablets, and then Moses comes down. I gave you the whole chapter here, so you can read it for yourself, and you'll see that what's in the middle there is not the 10 Commandments, but it seems to be talked about as if it was the 10 Commandments, the 10 words or utterances, whatever. And again, how you count them is a whole other story. But that seems to be what was put on those tablets. Completely different version. And as Rabbi Fixler mentioned, many modern Bible scholars say that may have been the original 10 Commandments. The one that we prize today was from the Deuteronomist. For those of you who follow the JEPD history of the text, the Deuteronomist who put it first in Deuteronomy and then saw it was missing in Exodus and stuffed it in a not quite perfect setting. Go back and read Exodus 20 and you'll see it. It's a little bit confusing why it appears exactly where it does. It's not clear what's going on, and that's because perhaps the Deuteronomist stuffed it in there because he wanted to emphasize, by the way, a more poetic version of the 10 Commandments, the one that everybody loves, right? Just to say. Okay. If you want to compare all 3 versions, you can see it at Wikipedia's article on the ritual Decalogue, which I copied on pages 4 and 5. The columns, you can see the 3 different versions in the columns there. But now, so far, we've only been talking about Judaism and Christianity, and of course, Christianity is about 1/3 of the world's population. We're about 1/5 of 1% of the world's population. That still is not anywhere near a majority of people in the world. For instance, what do Muslims think? So I knew this before I saw this Wikipedia article because I had done a dialogue with a friend of mine who's a Muslim scholar. The Muslims don't exactly have the 10 Commandments the way we have them, but they sort of do. So this is from the Wikipedia article on the 10 Commandments in the section on Islam, and it has a chart on pages 7 and 8, which shows how they kind of line up with what we have as the 10 Commandments. However, at the bottom of page 7 is a 7th commandment in the Quran, which is give full measure and weight with justice. We have that commandment, but it's not in the top 10. It's somewhere else. It's in Exodus later. On the right doesn't exist the remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. So that the Muslims do not have the commandment to remember the Sabbath day or observe the Sabbath day and to rest on the Sabbath day at all. That's not part of their world. And I was told that the reason they don't have it is they said God is perfect. God created the world. But God did not need to rest. So God did not rest on the 7th day. And if God didn't rest, we're not resting. Now, I kind of feel bad for the Muslims because I like the idea of resting 1 day a week, but it's not in their list of commandments at all, right? So we're putting this up on the wall of a school for every American And Muslims, at least for sure, don't consent to that one. And then, of course, there's Hindus and Buddhists. Now, there's another section, another thing that we've been arguing with the state legislature about is this new school curriculum. And they have a section on love your neighbor as yourself, and they point out all the different faith traditions that have some version of love your neighbor as yourself. And so that is true. And there are probably in Hindu and Buddhist texts some elements of other things. I'm sure nobody says it's a good idea to go around murdering or committing adultery or stealing, so the commandments that are actually also crimes, like every civilized society kind of supports those ideas. We don't need 10 commandments to support them. Okay, now let's go back to Chris. So anyway, Muslims, Buddhists don't have the 10 commandments at all, and yet they're going to be in the schoolrooms. We're holding this up and saying this is why you should be good, and it doesn't really resonate with them at all. Maybe even offends them and makes them feel isolated. Now let's take a look at what Christianity actually says is the most important commandment. We're fetishizing the 10 commandments by putting them up on a wall, saying, oh, these are the big 10, we're going to make a big deal, we've got to put them up so we can look at them all the time. What did Jesus actually say is the most important commandment? Glad you asked, as Rabbi Fixler would say. In 3 of the 4 Gospels, Jesus is asked that question, what's the most important commandment? Matthew, Mark, and Luke, I give them to you right there. And what is his answer? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and all your strength. That is Deuteronomy. And love your neighbor as yourself, Leviticus. Does he say anything about the 10 commandments? No. None of the 10 commandments are in his top 2. That's Jesus talking. So I give you the sources over there. Okay, let's go to page 10. So in Judaism, of course, we say there's 613 commandments, but the very text that tells you that there's 613 commandments is found in the Talmud, Makot, page 23b to 24a. And after it tells you that there's 613 commandments, it then reduces that because that's too hard for most Jews to get their head around. Really, why do you think a Jew, by the way, is going up to Jesus asking him, what's the most important commandment? Because Jews were asking that question. What's the most important commandment? Rabbi, you have time to study the Bible. I don't have time. 613 commandments, what am I supposed to do? I've got to go out and farm my land. Tell me what I need to know in your elevator speech. They had elevators. Give me your sound bite, if they knew what that meant. And so people were trying to reduce it. So the Talmud itself, after telling you 613 commandments, reduces it. Micah, one of my favorite ones, I now have a t-shirt and a tie with this statement on it. For those of you who are counting my ties. Micah came and established by 3, it has been told you, a man, what is good and what the Lord requires of you, only to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Are any of those the 10 commandments? No. Isaiah then reduces it to 2, Amos reduces it to 1, and then we also have these other statements. We all know Hillel was asked the same question, tell me what I need to know while I stand on one foot, the version of an elevator speech. What you find hateful to your neighbor, don't do it yourself. The rest is commentary, go and study. Interesting, by the way, he doesn't quote the Bible. I think that is a sign of rabbinic authority. I don't need to quote the Bible. I'm going to give it to you in my own words. That's kind of cool. Well, about 100 years later, Rabbi Akiva, of course, said, love your neighbor as yourself is the most important commandment. And I'm sure he didn't get it from Jesus. He knew it already. Ben Azai, his counterpart, said, no, I got a better one. How about we're all created in God's image? And if you treat everybody like they're all created in God's image, you will treat them appropriately. In any case, again, not one of the 10 commandments. And finally, Shimon HaTzedek, one of my other favorite scholars, says, on 3 things the world stands. I believe he meant the Jewish world. On Torah, the wisdom that we have in our tradition. Service, which is worship of God, and acts of loving kindness. And if you look closely, this is another classic rabbinic move. So if you already knew, and by the way, Jesus took this, I think, from Philo, right? Philo was talking about having a spiritual relationship and having ethical commandments, right? So love God and love your fellow man. It's sort of those two sides, right? Shimon HaTzadik does it, but he does it in a very Jewish way. Loving God, that's kind of mushy. Loving your fellow, what does that mean? He says, act on your feelings, right? If you love God, you will worship God. If you love your fellow human being, you'll do acts of kindness for them, right? So it's all about what you do, which is a very Jewish thing. Anyways, those are Jewish answers to what's important, not, if we were going to fetishize something, the Ten Commandments. So the next page is a text of the Ten Commandments. How much time do I have left? Oh, good. All right. Okay, so this is the text of the actual Texas bill, which is exactly what's on the monument. I took a picture of the monument, which is exactly what Rabbi Fixler described. It does have God's name, capital N, the whole thing, and it also says it's from the Order of Eagles of Texas, the Fraternal Order of Eagles. Okay, so let's take a look at these 10 commandments they want to fetishize. First of all, I am the Lord your God. We count that as a commandment, they don't. Do they assume, when they put this on the board, that Hindus and Buddhists worship the same God that we do? My assumption is, and this is after doing some interfaith work, I think they are worshiping the same God, but you really have to spend a lot of time thinking about it to get there. And I'm not so sure the legislature thought about that. And so what do the Hindus and Buddhists think when they see that on the wall? Don't have any other gods besides me, like, Ganesh, the one with the elephant head, and all the ones with the several arms and all that. So, you really have to do some thinking about Hinduism to get to one God and not having other gods and not having any graven images. And by the way, why is it anybody's business? That's the whole point of this country, right? They were not based so much on Christianity as they were on the Enlightenment and the idea that the government should not coerce people's beliefs. Well, we'll see that in a minute. It's not any of our business what people believe, and we shouldn't be trying to inculcate that with the authority of the government. Right? So they're worried about people not being moral today, and we need more religion or whatever. Fine, that's my job. That's Talrico's job, who's arguing against this bill, by the way. He's studying to be a minister. That's what priests and ministers are for. That's what imams are for. But the power of the government shouldn't be trying to force somebody's religion on you. That's what this country was based on. Anyway, remember the Sabbath day? I already said it's not in the Muslim text, probably not in the Buddhist or Hindu faith either. For the Christians, they don't do Saturday. Talrico actually pointed that out. They were voting on this bill on Saturday. He says, you're going to put this out on the wall there. You're supposed to observe the Sabbath day, and here we are working on the Sabbath day. And by the way, what's the Christian day is Sunday. That's when we're going to actually vote. Now we're discussing it. Now we're going to vote it on Sunday. Okay, so they're not keeping it. Well, they posted it on the outside of the Capitol, but they're not following it inside the building. Honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long. We want everybody to honor their parents, but again, are you going to enforce that? Is that going to be a crime if you don't honor your parents? Thou shalt not, these are the ones that are criminal. Don't kill, by the way, it's don't murder. They say don't kill. Richard Elliott Friedman in his commentary on that passage says it's definitely murder and not kill. So it's a mistranslation. But anyway, it's a crime. Don't commit adultery is a crime. Don't steal is a crime. Bearing false witness is committing perjury, which is also a crime. And then don't covet your neighbor's wife. So are we going to make that a crime? And who cares? What business is it of anybody's? Yeah, it would be better if we didn't, if we all minded our own business. But if somebody's going to be jealous of something, I don't see that's anybody's business. So do we need to put these on the wall in order to teach values? Many of these things are already illegal, and the other ones, I think, is really not our place to tell people what to do. The article here in the Texas Tribune on page 12 it says they tried to amend it by giving school districts the opportunity to vote on the policy. They rejected that by adding codes of ethics from other faith traditions to sort of balance it out. We accept all people's faiths. No, they didn't do that. They said the state would be responsible for any legal fees if a school district is sued. That means our tax dollars are going to pay for this. The poster can only include the text that they said, no more and no less. And the person who sponsored the bill said, "It is incumbent on all of us to follow God's law, and I think we would all be better off if we did." Well, that's exactly why it shouldn't be up on the thing, because it's not the responsibility of the government to tell us that. Supporters argue that the Ten Commandments and teachings of Christianity are more generally accorded U.S. history. Rabbi Fixler already talked about that. And they also, by the way, passed another bill to say that we must use the nomenclature Anno Domini, year of our Lord, AD, and before Christ, BC, whereas the modern scholarship says BCE and CE. That's the more accurate, the more ecumenical, the more scholarly, but we're going back to the Dark Ages. Let's take a look at the last page. So this is in direct violation of a 1980s U.S. Supreme Court decision, Stone versus Graham. You can see the holding in the first paragraph there, which was exactly this case. 1980, it is violation of the Constitution, period. Why are they doing it now? Because they now have a supermajority of very conservative judges, and they believe that when it goes to the Supreme Court now, it will overturn this decision. The First Amendment includes an establishment clause that the government shall not establish any religion. That's exactly what this would do. And Jefferson's belief was, he interpreted these clauses as creating a wall of separation between church and state, preventing government from establishing a religion or interfering with the free exercise thereof. And his letter to Danbury Baptists, he said, he called it a wall of separation between church and state. So one of the things they want to claim is that that's bogus, but it's not bogus. One of our major founding fathers, Jefferson, wrote that. And by the way, he wrote it to a Baptist church, and that's not an accident. Guess which denomination of Christianity was violently opposed to government supervision of religion? The Baptists. Go figure. Have a good Shavuot.